Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the fluorescent lights of the University Research Center buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the stack of papers before me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the pen, the weight of my decision suddenly feeling much heavier than I'd anticipated. Mr. Thompson, are you ready to proceed? Dr. Eliza Chen's voice cut through my hesitation, her tone a mix of professionalism and barely concealed excitement. I looked up at her, forcing a smile. Yes, just taking it all in, I guess. Dr. Chen nodded, her sleek black hair bobbing with the movement. I understand. It's a big decision, but I assure you this study could be groundbreaking. And of course, the compensation is quite generous. The mention of money made my stomach clench. That's why I was here, wasn't it? The flyer I'd seen in the student union had promised $5,000 for a week-long sleep study. As a grad student drowning in debt, it had seemed like a godsend. I took a deep breath and began signing the forms. The scratching of pen on paper seemed unnaturally loud in the sterile room. With each signature, I felt a mix of excitement and unease growing within me. There, I said, pushing the completed forms across the desk. All done? Dr. Chen's smile widened as she collected the papers. Excellent, Mr. Thompson. Or may I call you Tom? Tom's fine, I replied, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. Well, Tom, let me introduce you to the rest of the team. She stood and gestured for me to follow her out of the office. As we walked down the corridor, the reality of what I'd just agreed to began to sink in. I was going to be one of the first human test subjects for a new sleep regulation drug. The potential benefits for people with sleep disorders were enormous, but so were the unknowns. We entered a large laboratory, where 3 other researchers were busy at their stations. Dr. Chen cleared her throat, and they all looked up. Everyone, this is Tom Thompson, our newest volunteer, she announced. Tom, meet Dr. James Reeves, our neuropharmacologist, Dr. Sarah Patel, our sleep specialist, and Mark Dawson, our lead technician. They each nodded in greeting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. Apprehension, maybe? Dr. Reeves, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, approached me with an outstretched hand. Welcome aboard, Tom. We're grateful for your participation. This study could change the lives of millions suffering from sleep disorders. I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip. Happy to help. And, well, the money doesn't hurt either, I added with a nervous laugh. An awkward silence followed, broken by Dr. Patel. Yes, well, we believe in compensating our volunteers fairly. Now shall we go over the procedure? For the next hour, they explained the study in detail. The drug, XR-17, was designed to induce a deep restorative sleep state. They would monitor my brain activity, vital signs, and sleep patterns over the course of a week. As they spoke, I found my excitement waning, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The technical jargon and clinical detachment of the researchers made me feel less like a person and more like a lab rat. Any questions, Tom? Dr. Chen asked as they concluded their explanation. I hesitated, then asked, what about side effects? Are there any risks? The researchers exchanged glances before Dr. Reeves spoke up. As with any new drug, there are always potential risks. However, our animal trials have shown minimal side effects. You may experience some vivid dreams or slight disorientation upon waking, but nothing severe. His words were meant to be reassuring, but something in his tone made my skin prickle. I pushed the feeling aside, reminding myself of the money and the good this research could do. Okay, I said, nodding. When do we start? Right now, if you're ready, Dr. Chen replied. Mark will show you to the sleep lab and help you get set up. Mark, the technician, led me to another room. This one was smaller, dominated by a hospital bed surrounded by various machines. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. You can change into these, Mark said, handing me a set of hospital scrubs. I'll be back in a few minutes to hook you up to the monitors. As I changed, I caught sight of myself in a small mirror on the wall. My reflection looked pale and nervous, a far cry from the confident grad student who had walked into the research center earlier that day. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. "It's just a week of your life, and then you'll be debt-free." Mark returned and began attaching electrodes to my head and chest. Each cold touch of the sensors against my skin made my heart rate spike. "Try to relax," Mark said, noticing my tension. "The more relaxed you are, the easier it'll be for the drug to take effect." I nodded, taking deep breaths as I lay back on the bed. The other researchers filed into the room, each taking their place at different monitoring stations. Dr. Chen approached with a syringe. "This is the XR-17, she explained. "You'll feel sleepy very quickly after I administer it. Just let yourself drift off, okay?" I swallowed hard, suddenly wanting to call the whole thing off. But the thought of going back to my cramped apartment to my stack of unpaid bills steeled my resolve. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready." I felt the sharp prick of the needle in my arm, followed by a cool sensation as the drug entered my bloodstream. Almost immediately, a heavy drowsiness began to wash over me. "Good luck, Tom," Dr. Chen said, her voice already sounding distant. "We'll see you in a week." As my eyelids grew heavy, I caught a glimpse of the researchers' faces. They looked tense, expectant. In my last moments of consciousness, a terrifying thought flashed through my mind. What if I can't wake up? But it was too late. The darkness was already closing in, pulling me under into what I hoped would be a peaceful, week-long slumber. As consciousness slipped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The last thing I heard before succumbing completely was Dr. Reeves's voice, unnervingly urgent. His brainwaves are already showing unusual patterns. This isn't what we expected. Then there was nothing but the vast, unknown realm of deep sleep stretching out before me, ready to swallow me whole. I blinked, disoriented by the sudden shift from darkness to light. Gone was the sterile research lab, replaced by a world so vivid and surreal that my breath caught in my throat. The sky above me swirled with impossible colors, deep purples bleeding into electric blues and shimmering golds. Beneath my feet, the ground pulsed with a soft bioluminescent glow. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice sounding strange and echoey in this bizarre landscape. I spun around, taking in my surroundings. Rolling hills covered in iridescent grass stretched as far as the eye could see. In the distance, crystal-like structures jutted from the ground, reflecting and refracting the kaleidoscopic sky. A warm breeze caressed my skin, carrying with it the scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. I inhaled deeply, surprised by how real it all felt. This was unlike any dream I'd ever experienced. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" Only the whisper of the wind answered me. I took a tentative step forward, half expecting the ground to give way beneath me, but it held firm, the grass tickling my bare feet. Wait, bare feet? I looked down at myself, realizing I was no longer wearing the hospital scrubs. Instead, I was clothed in a shimmering material that seemed to change color with every movement. "Okay, Tom," I said to myself, trying to stay calm. "This is just a very vivid dream. The drug is working, that's all. You'll wake up soon." But as I began to walk, exploring this strange new world, a nagging doubt grew in the back of my mind. Everything felt too real, too detailed. I could feel the individual blades of grass between my toes, smell the earthy scent of the soil, hear the faint humming that seemed to emanate from the crystal structures. As I approached one of the towering crystals, my reflection caught my eye. But the face staring back at me wasn't quite my own. It was me, but different. My features were sharper, more defined, and my eyes glowed with an inner light. "What's happening to me?" I whispered, reaching out to touch the smooth surface of the crystal. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed before my eyes: the research lab, The concerned faces of the scientists, my own body lying motionless on the hospital bed. I jerked my hand away, gasping. "I need to wake up," I said, my voice rising with panic. "This isn't right. I need to wake up." I pinched myself hard, slapped my face, even considered throwing myself to the ground. But nothing changed. The dream world remained as vivid and present as ever. "Hello, Tom," a voice said from behind me. I whirled around to find a figure standing there. It was humanoid in shape, but its form seemed to shift and change, never settling on a single appearance. What are you?" I asked, taking a step back. The figure tilted its head, an approximation of a smile forming on its ever-changing face. "I am a guide of sorts. You can call me Zephyr." "A guide? What do you mean? Where am I?" Zephyr gestured broadly at the landscape around us. "You are in the dreamscape, Tom, a realm between consciousness and unconsciousness, reality and imagination." I shook my head, frustration building. "No, this is just a dream. A very vivid dream caused by that experimental drug. I need to wake up." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Zephyr said, its voice tinged with what sounded like sympathy. "The barrier between your world and this one has become blurred. You are trapped here, at least for now." The words hit me like a physical blow. Trapped? No, that couldn't be right. This was supposed to be a simple sleep study, a week of easy money. Not this. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't real. It can't be." Zephyr approached me slowly, its form still shifting. "I understand your disbelief, Tom, but the sooner you accept your situation, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this world." I backed away, shaking my head. No, I don't accept this. I won't." With that, I turned and ran, my feet carrying me swiftly over the glowing landscape. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. But the scenery never changed. The crystal structures loomed in the distance, never getting closer or farther away. It was as if I was running on a treadmill, the world moving around me but my position remaining fixed. Finally, exhausted, I collapsed onto the soft grass. Tears of frustration and fear welled up in my eyes. "Please," I whispered to no one in particular, "please let me wake up." As if in response to my plea, the world around me began to shift. The vibrant colors of the sky darkened, the once soothing hum of the crystals taking on a more ominous tone. The warm breeze turned cold, raising goosebumps on my skin. I scrambled to my feet, watching in horror as the beautiful dreamscape transformed into something far more sinister. The grass withered and died beneath my feet. The crystal structures cracked and shattered. "What's happening?" I cried out, spinning around in panic. "Your fear is reshaping the dreamscape." Zephyr's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Your emotions have power here, Tom, great power." Dark, shadowy figures began to emerge from the ground, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. They reached for me with elongated arms, their fingers like wisps of smoke. I tried to run, but my feet sank into the now soft ground. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. The shadowy figures drew closer, their whispers filling my head with doubts and fears. "No!" I shouted, closing my eyes tight. "This isn't real. It's just a dream. It's just a dream." But no matter how many times I repeated the mantra, the terror remained all too real. I could feel the cold touch of the shadow beings, hear their whispers growing louder. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, a hand grasped mine, pulling me free from the clinging ground. I opened my eyes to find Zephyr beside me, its form now solid and reassuring. "You must control your fears, Tom," it said urgently. "Your mind is powerful here, but untamed emotions can be dangerous." I nodded, still gasping for breath. How? How do I control this?" "Focus," Zephyr instructed. "Visualize calm, safety. The dreamscape will respond." Closing my eyes again, I tried to steady my racing heart. I thought of peaceful things, a quiet library, a sunlit meadow, the gentle lapping of waves on a beach. Slowly, I felt the world around me shift once more. When I opened my eyes, the nightmarish landscape had receded. We stood in a tranquil forest glade, sunlight filtering through the leaves above. "Better," Zephyr said, nodding approvingly. "But this is only the beginning, Tom. You have much to learn if you hope to survive here and find your way back." The weight of Zephyr's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a dream. This was something far more complex, more dangerous. And I was trapped here, possibly for much longer than the week I had signed up for. As the realization sank in, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Fear, curiosity, and a determination I didn't know I possessed. Whatever this place was, whatever challenges lay ahead, I had to find a way to overcome them. I had to find a way back to my world, my life. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Teach me. I need to understand this place if I'm going to survive it." Zephyr nodded, a hint of a smile on its ever-changing face. "Very well, Tom. Your first lesson begins now. In the dreamscape, reality is fluid, shaped by will and imagination. To master this realm, you must first master your own mind." As Zephyr spoke, the forest around us began to shift and change, responding to some unspoken command. I watched in awe, realizing that my journey through this strange and perilous dream world was only just beginning. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the tense silence in the research lab. Dr. Eliza Chen stood at the foot of the hospital bed, her eyes fixed on the motionless form of Tom Thompson. It had been 72 hours since they'd administered the experimental drug, and Tom showed no signs of waking. "His vitals are stable," Dr. Sarah Patel said, breaking the silence. "But his brain activity, I've never seen anything like it." Dr. James Reeves leaned in, studying the EEG readout. "It's as if he's in a state of perpetual REM sleep, but more intense. The neural pathways are lighting up in ways I didn't think were possible." Dr. Chen ran a hand through her disheveled hair, the weight of their mistake bearing down on her. "We need to wake him up. Now." "We've tried everything," Mark Dawson, the technician, said. "Standard wake-up protocols, stimulants, even mild electrical impulses. Nothing's working." The door to the lab burst open and a middle-aged couple rushed in, their faces etched with worry and anger. "Where is he? Where's our son?" the woman demanded, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Tom's still form. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Chen said, stepping forward. "I'm Dr. Chen. We spoke on the phone." Tom's father strode up to Dr. Chen, his face red with fury. "You said this was a simple sleep study. You said he'd be fine." "Mr. Thompson, please," Dr. Chen said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We're doing everything we can to—" "To what?" Mrs. Thompson interrupted, moving to her son's bedside. "To fix what you've done to him?" She reached out, gently stroking Tom's hair. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Doctor," Reeves cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I know this is difficult, but I assure you we're working around the clock to understand what's happening and how to bring Tom back to consciousness." "Bring him back?" Mr. Thompson's voice rose. "You make it sound like he's gone somewhere. He's right here." He gestured angrily at the bed. Dr. Patel stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "Physically, yes, but Tom's mind is in a state we've never encountered before. It's as if he's trapped in a dream state that we can't pull him out of." Mrs. Thompson looked up, her eyes wide with fear. "Trapped? What do you mean, trapped?" The researchers exchanged uneasy glances. Dr. Chen took a deep breath before speaking. "Based on his brain activity, we believe Tom is experiencing an incredibly vivid, possibly lucid dream state, but the drug has altered his brain chemistry in a way we didn't anticipate. We're having trouble breaking through to his conscious mind." "This is insane," Mr. Thompson muttered, pacing the room. "We're calling the police, the media. Everyone needs to know what you've done." "Please," Dr. Chen pleaded. I understand your anger, but publicizing this now could jeopardize Tom's chances of recovery. We need time to work on a solution without outside pressure or interference. As the Thompsons argued with the researchers, none of them noticed the slight twitch of Tom's fingers or the rapid movement behind his closed eyelids. In Tom's dream world, he was running. The peaceful forest glade had given way to a dark, twisted landscape. Trees with gnarled branches reached out like claws, trying to snag his clothes. The ground beneath his feet shifted unpredictably, sometimes solid, sometimes sinking like quicksand. Control your mind, Tom. Zephyr's voice echoed around him. Remember, your fears shape this world. Tom stumbled, falling to his knees. He could hear whispers on the wind, familiar voices filled with worry and anger. Mom? Dad? He called out, looking around frantically. But all he saw were shadows and mist. Back in the lab, the argument had escalated. Mr. Thompson was on the phone with his lawyer, while Mrs. Thompson sobbed quietly by Tom's bedside. Dr. Chen turned to her team. We need options. Now. Dr. Reeves spoke up. We could try a controlled dose of a counteragent, something to neutralize the effects of XR-17. That's too risky, Dr. Patel countered. We don't know how it might interact with the original drug. We could end up causing permanent brain damage. As they debated, a soft groan from the bed silenced everyone. They all turned to see Tom's face contorted in what looked like pain or fear. Tommy? Mrs. Thompson said, hope and fear mingling in her voice. Can you hear me, sweetie? In the dream world, Tom was curled up on the ground, hands over his ears, trying to block out the cacophony of voices and sounds assaulting him. It's not real, he muttered to himself. It's just a dream. Wake up, Tom. Wake up. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free from the nightmare. The world around him continued to shift and change, reflecting his inner turmoil. Zephyr appeared beside him, its form flickering like a faulty hologram. Tom, listen to me. You're picking up echoes from the waking world. It's destabilizing your hold on the dreamscape. Tom looked up, his eyes wild. The waking world? You mean, I can hear what's happening outside? Then there's a way out. He stood up, shouting into the void. Mom! Dad! I'm here! Help me wake up! But his cries only seemed to make things worse. The dream world began to fracture, reality splintering around him like breaking glass. In the lab, Tom's body began to convulse. Alarms blared as his heart rate spiked dangerously. He's going into shock, Dr. Patel yelled, rushing to the bedside. We need to stabilize him. The room erupted into chaos. Nurses rushed in with emergency equipment. The Thompsons were ushered out, their protests drowned out by the sound of medical orders being shouted. Dr. Chen stood frozen for a moment, watching as her team fought to save Tom's life. The weight of her responsibility, of her mistake, threatened to crush her. Dr. Chen, Mark's voice snapped her back to reality. We need you. She shook off her paralysis and jumped into action, barking orders and working alongside her team to bring Tom back from the brink. Hours passed in a blur of tense moments and medical interventions. Finally, as dawn broke outside the lab windows, Tom's condition stabilized. The research team slumped in exhaustion, the adrenaline of the crisis wearing off. Dr. Chen looked at each of them in turn, seeing her own fear and uncertainty reflected in their eyes. We can't keep this contained much longer, Dr. Reeves said, breaking the silence. The university, the ethics board, they're going to find out. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. I know, but right now our priority is Tom. We need to find a way to wake him up before... She couldn't finish the sentence, the implications too horrifying to voice. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A stern-looking man in a suit entered, flanked by two university officials. Dr. Chen? The man said. I'm Richard Dawkins, legal counsel for the university. We need to talk about the situation with Mr. Thompson. Dr. Chen straightened her lab coat, steeling herself for the confrontation to come. She knew that from this moment on, everything would change. Their careers, their reputations, possibly even their freedom hung in the balance. But as she glanced at Tom's still form on the bed, she knew that none of that mattered compared to the life of the young man they had put in jeopardy. Whatever the cost, they had to find a way to bring him back. As the legal team began their interrogation, Dr. Chen made a silent promise to Tom and his family. She would not rest until she found a way to undo what they had done, to free Tom from the prison of his own mind. In the dreamscape, Tom huddled in a small cave, the only safe haven he had managed to create in the chaotic world around him. He could still hear the echoes of the outside world, could sense the turmoil surrounding his physical body. "Hold on," he whispered to himself, clinging to the hope that somehow, some way, he would find his way back to consciousness. Just hold on. Time had lost all meaning for Tom. In the dreamscape, days could feel like seconds, or a single moment could stretch into an eternity. The once beautiful world had twisted into a nightmarish hellscape, mirroring the deterioration of Tom's mental state. He stumbled through a landscape of shifting shadows and impossible geometries. The ground beneath his feet alternated between scorching hot and freezing cold, each step a gamble. In the distance, mountains rose and crumbled in the blink of an eye, while the sky above churned with colors that hurt to look at. "Hello?" Tom called out, his voice hoarse from screaming. "Is anyone there? Zephyr? Anyone?" Only his distorted echo answered him, bouncing off surfaces that shouldn't exist. Tom fell to his knees, clutching his head in his hands. "This isn't real," he muttered, rocking back and forth. "It's just a dream. Just a dream. Wake up, Tom. Wake up." But no matter how many times he repeated the mantra, the nightmare persisted. Worse, with each passing moment, memories of his real life began to slip away like sand through his fingers. A sound like shattering glass made Tom look up. The air in front of him seemed to crack, and through the fissure he caught a glimpse of something. A hospital room? Blurry figures moving around a bed? "Hello?" he called again, scrambling to his feet. "Can you hear me? I'm here. I'm trapped." The crack in reality widened, and suddenly Tom could hear voices. "Brain activity is off the charts," a woman's voice said, sounding stressed and exhausted. "It's like his mind is in overdrive, but we can't reach him." "We need to try the new compound," a man replied. "It's risky, but we're running out of options." Tom's heart raced. They were talking about him. They were trying to wake him up. "Hey!" he shouted, pounding on the invisible barrier between worlds. "I'm here! I can hear you!" But they couldn't hear him. The crack began to close, the voices fading away. "No, no, no," Tom cried, desperately clawing at the air. "Don't go, please." As the last sliver of reality disappeared, a new sound filled the air. Laughter. Cold, cruel laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Tom spun around, trying to locate the source. "Who's there? Show yourself!" The laughter grew louder, and the shadows around him began to coalesce into a monstrous form. It towered over Tom, its features constantly shifting, but always terrifying. "Who am I?" The creature spoke, its voice a cacophony of Tom's worst fears. "I'm you, Tom. The you that you've been trying so hard to ignore. Your fears, your doubts, your darkest thoughts, all given form in this wonderful playground of the mind." Tom backed away, shaking his head. "No, you're not real. You're just another nightmare." The shadow creature lunged forward, its form engulfing Tom. Suddenly, he was assaulted by a barrage of images and sensations. Every failure, every embarrassment, every moment of self-doubt he'd ever experienced played out in vivid detail. "Stop it!" Tom screamed, falling to his knees once again. "Get out of my head!" The creature retreated, reforming in front of Tom. "But I am your head, Tom, or at least the parts of it you'd rather forget. And now, thanks to that wonderful drug, I'm free to play." Tom struggled to his feet, his whole body shaking. "I won't let you win. This is my mind, my dream." The shadow laughed again. "Is it? Are you sure about that? How long have you been here, Tom? Days? Weeks? Months?" Do you even remember your life before this? The question hit Tom like a physical blow. He tried to picture his apartment, his friends, his family. But the images were hazy, indistinct. Panic rose in his throat. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. "You're fading away," the shadow replied almost gleefully. "The longer you stay here, the more you forget. Soon there won't be anything left of Tom Thompson. Just the dream. Just us." "No," Tom shouted, finding a reserve of strength. "I won't let that happen. I'll find a way out." He turned and ran, not knowing where he was going, but desperate to escape the shadow creature and its taunting words. The landscape blurred around him, changing with each step. One moment he was running through a desert, the next through a frozen tundra, then an overgrown jungle. As he ran, other figures began to appear, shadowy forms that called out to him with familiar voices. "Tom? Tom, is that you?" He skidded to a halt, panting heavily. A few yards away stood a woman who looked vaguely familiar. Her form was hazy, like a half-remembered photograph. Who are you?" Tom asked, approaching cautiously. The woman's face crumpled in despair. "You don't recognize me?" "It's Mom, Tommy, your mother." Tom's heart clenched. He knew he should recognize her, knew this woman was important, but the details kept slipping away. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. I can't remember." More figures appeared, all with familiar voices but indistinct features. They called out to him, pleaded with him to remember them. "This isn't real," Tom muttered, backing away from the crowd of shades. "You're not real. You're just more tricks of this place." "We're real, Tom," his mother insisted. "We're trapped here too, lost in the dream, just like you." For a moment, Tom wanted to believe her. The loneliness and fear he'd been feeling threatened to overwhelm him. But then he remembered Zephyr's warnings about the dangers of the dreamscape. "No," he said, his voice growing stronger. "You're not real. You're just manifestations of my memories, my fears of forgetting." As he spoke, the figures began to waver and distort. Their pleas turned to angry howls as they dissolved into mist. Tom turned and ran again, pushing himself harder than ever. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving, had to keep fighting against the madness threatening to consume him. After what felt like hours of running, Tom collapsed, his lungs burning and his muscles screaming in protest. He found himself in a barren plain, featureless, except for a single, twisted tree. As he caught his breath, he noticed something carved into the trunk of the tree. Crawling closer, he realized it was writing, names and dates, hundreds of them, covering every inch of the gnarled bark. With trembling fingers, he traced the letters of one name: Thomas Thompson, 09/20/2024. That's me," he whispered. "That's my name, my real name." A spark of memory ignited in his mind. Flashes of his life before the dream came rushing back, his apartment, his graduate studies, the flyer for the sleep study. "I remember," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I remember who I am." But even as he spoke, he noticed the letters of his name beginning to fade, as if being erased by an invisible hand. "No," he cried, frantically trying to carve the name back into the bark with his fingernails. "I won't forget. I can't forget." "It's too late, Tom," the shadow creature's voice echoed around him. "You're already forgetting. Soon you'll be just another lost soul in the dreamscape." Tom slumped against the tree, tears streaming down his face. He was tired, so tired of fighting, of running, of trying to hold on to his sanity in this insane world. But as he sat there, on the verge of giving up, a new voice cut through the despair, a voice he recognized. "Tom? Tom, can you hear me?" It was Zephyr. Tom's head snapped up, hope rekindling in his chest. "Zephyr? Where are you?" "I'm here, Tom," the voice replied, growing stronger. "I've been searching for you. You've wandered so far into the deep dreamscape I almost couldn't find you." A shimmering form began to materialize in front of Tom. Zephyr's ever-changing visage was a welcome sight after the horrors he'd faced. "Zephyr," Tom said, his voice cracking with emotion. I think I'm losing myself. I can't remember. I can't." Zephyr knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, Tom. You're stronger than you know. Your mind is fighting, both here and in the waking world. But you need to focus. Remember who you are. Remember why you're fighting." Tom closed his eyes, concentrating with all his might on the fragments of memory he still possessed. His name, his family, his life before the dream. As he focused, the world around him began to shift once more. The barren plain gave way to a familiar scene, the university campus where he'd first seen the flyer for the sleep study. "That's it, Tom," Zephyr encouraged. "Hold on to those memories. They're your anchor to reality." Tom opened his eyes, a newfound determination burning within him. "I won't let this place beat me," he said, his voice steady. "I'll find a way back, no matter what it takes." Zephyr nodded, a hint of a smile on its ever-changing face. "That's the spirit. But the journey ahead will be harder than anything you've faced so far. Are you ready?" Tom stood up, squaring his shoulders. "I'm ready. Let's go." As they set off across the dreamscape, Tom knew that his battle was far from over. The shadow creature, his own fears and doubts, still lurked in the recesses of his mind. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope. He would find his way back. He had to. The alternative was to be lost forever in the labyrinth of his own mind. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the hushed hospital room. Tom's motionless form lay on the bed, surrounded by a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin had grown pale, his cheeks sunken. If not for the rise and fall of his chest, he might have been mistaken for a corpse. Sarah Thompson sat by her son's bedside, her once vibrant red hair now streaked with gray. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to countless sleepless nights. She held Tom's limp hand, her thumb tracing small circles on his palm. "Hey, Tommy," she said softly, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It's Mom. I'm here again. I brought you some fresh flowers. Daisies. Remember how you used to pick them for me when you were little?" The only response was the continued beeping of the heart monitor. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The door opened, and Dr. Eliza Chen entered, looking as haggard as Sarah felt. The once impeccable researcher now moved with the weariness of someone carrying an immense burden. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Chen said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How are you holding up?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "How do you think, Doctor? My son has been in a coma for 3 months because of your experiment. I'm living a nightmare." Dr. Chen flinched at the accusation but didn't argue. She moved to check Tom's vitals, her movements mechanical, born of repetition. "Any changes?" Sarah asked, a hint of desperate hope in her voice. Dr. Chen shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. Tom's condition remains stable, but unchanged." Sarah's grip on Tom's hand tightened. "What about the new treatment you mentioned last week? The one that might help wake him up?" Dr. Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We're still running tests. The compound is experimental, and given what happened with the original drug, we can't rush into—" "Rush?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "It's been 3 months. How much longer are you going to make him suffer? How much longer are you going to make us suffer?" Before Dr. Chen could respond, the door burst open. Jack Thompson, Tom's father, strode in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "I just got off the phone with our lawyer," he announced, glaring at Dr. Chen. "The university is trying to settle out of court. Can you believe it? They think they can just throw money at this and make it go away." Dr. Chen paled. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your anger, but—" "No, you don't understand," Jack shouted, jabbing a finger at her. "That's my son lying there, my boy, and you and your team did this to him. All for what? Some breakthrough in sleep science? Sarah stood up, placing a calming hand on her husband's arm. "Jack, please. Not here. Not now." Jack deflated slightly, the anger giving way to exhaustion and grief. He moved to the other side of Tom's bed, taking his son's free hand. "I'm sorry, Tommy," he whispered. "I'm sorry we let this happen to you." As the Thompsons comforted each other, Dr. Chen quietly excused herself from the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "Dr. Chen?" She looked up to see Dr. James Reeves approaching, a tablet in his hand. "James?" she said, straightening up. "Any news?" He nodded, his expression grim. "The ethics board has scheduled a hearing. They want to review the entire XR-17 project. And there's talk of criminal charges." Dr. Chen felt the floor sway beneath her feet. "Criminal charges? But we followed all the protocols. The drug was cleared for human trials." "I know," Dr. Reeves said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "But with Tom's condition and the media attention, they're looking for someone to blame." Dr. Chen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of guilt and fear pressing down on her. "What about Tom? Any progress on waking him up?" Dr. Reeves shook his head. "His brain activity is still off the charts. It's like he's trapped in an endless dream state. We've tried everything, Eliza. Maybe it's time we start considering long-term care options." "No," Dr. Chen said firmly, opening her eyes. "I won't give up on him. We did this to him, James. We have to fix it." As they continued their hushed conversation, neither noticed the young nurse who had paused nearby, listening intently. Inside Tom's room, Sarah and Jack sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The monotonous beep of the heart monitor was suddenly interrupted by a soft groan. Sarah's head snapped up. "Tom? Tommy, can you hear me?" For a moment, Tom's eyelids fluttered, and his fingers twitched in his mother's grasp. Sarah and Jack leaned in, hearts racing with hope. "That's it, son," Jack encouraged. "Come back to us. You can do it." But as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. Tom's face relaxed back into its comatose state, leaving his parents devastated. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah sobbed, collapsing against her husband's chest. "I can't keep watching him like this day after day." Jack held her tight, his own eyes brimming with tears. "I know, honey. I know. But we can't give up on him. Tom's still in there somewhere. We have to believe that." As they clung to each other, the world outside the hospital room continued to move on. In the bustling city beyond the hospital walls, life went on as usual. People rushed to work, children went to school, and the daily rhythm of life continued unabated. But for the Thompsons, time had stopped the moment Tom had slipped into his coma. Their world had shrunk to the confines of this sterile hospital room, their lives revolving around the hope that today might be the day their son would wake up. In the hospital cafeteria, Dr. Chen sat alone, absently stirring a cold cup of coffee. The television in the corner was tuned to a local news channel, the anchor's voice a low murmur in the background. And in local news, the controversy surrounding the university sleep study continues. Thomas Thompson, the young graduate student who fell into a coma during the experimental trial, has now been unconscious for over 3 months. The Thompson family's lawyer has issued a statement. Dr. Chen tuned out the rest, unable to bear hearing about her failure yet again. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the countless unanswered messages from colleagues, friends, and family. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, how things had gone so terribly wrong. But she had no answers, only questions that haunted her day and night. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice Dr. Sarah Patel approach until the woman sat down across from her. "Eliza," Dr. Patel said softly, "we need to talk." Dr. Chen looked up, noting the serious expression on her colleague's face. "What is it, Sarah?" Dr. Patel took a deep breath. "I've been analyzing Tom's latest brain scans. There's something you need to see." She pulled out a tablet, bringing up a series of complex neural imaging scans. Dr. Chen leaned in, her eyes widening as she took in the data. Is this right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel nodded. "I've triple-checked the results. Tom's neural pathways are evolving. It's like his brain is rewiring itself. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Chen felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. "What does this mean for Tom? Could it help us wake him up?" "I don't know," Dr. Patel admitted. "But it's the first real change we've seen since this all began. It could be a breakthrough, or it could be his mind deteriorating further. We need to run more tests." "Doctor," Chen stood up, a newfound energy coursing through her. "Then let's get to work. We need to—" Her words were cut off by the shrill ring of her phone. She glanced at the screen, her face paling as she saw the caller ID. "It's the university board," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have to take this." As Dr. Chen stepped away to answer the call, Dr. Patel turned her attention back to the scans on her tablet. The complex web of neural activity pulsed and shifted before her eyes as if Tom's mind was trying to tell them something. "What are you trying to say, Tom?" she murmured. "What's happening inside that mind of yours?" Little did they know, deep within the recesses of Tom's consciousness, a battle was raging. A battle that would determine not just Tom's fate, but potentially the future of human consciousness itself. In the dreamscape, Tom stood at the edge of a vast chasm, the world around him shifting and changing with dizzying speed. Zephyr floated beside him, its form flickering like a faulty hologram. "You're getting stronger, Tom," Zephyr said. "You're learning to control the dreamscape, but the real test is still to come." Tom nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'm going to find my way back. My family, my life, they're waiting for me." As he spoke, the chasm before him began to fill with swirling, multicolored mist. Within the mist he could see fleeting images, his parents, the hospital room, the researchers working tirelessly to save him. "The barrier between dreams and reality is thinning," Zephyr explained. "Your mind is reaching out, trying to reconnect with your physical form. But be warned, Tom. The journey back will be perilous, and the longer you stay here, the harder it will be to leave." Tom took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "I understand, but I have to try. I have to wake up." With that, he stepped forward, plunging into the swirling mist. As the dreamscape dissolved around him, Tom could hear the faint, distant sound of his mother's voice calling his name. "I'm coming, Mom," he thought as consciousness began to slip away. "I'm coming home." The lab was a flurry of activity, a stark contrast to the months of stagnation that had preceded this moment. Dr. Chen stood at the center of the storm, barking orders and coordinating the efforts of her team. "Dr. Patel, I need those new EEG readings now. Mark, prep the neurostimulator. Dr. Reeves, double-check the dosage on that compound. We can't afford any mistakes, not now." The air crackled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. For the first time in months, they had seen a significant change in Tom's brain activity. It wasn't just the usual spikes and dips they'd grown accustomed to. This was something entirely new. Dr. Patel rushed over, tablet in hand. "Eliza, look at this," she said, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "The neural pathways in his frontal lobe, they're reconfiguring at an unprecedented rate." Dr. Chen studied the scans, her eyes widening. It's like his brain is creating new connections. But how is this possible?" Before Dr. Patel could respond, an alarm blared from Tom's room. Both women sprinted down the hall, bursting through the door to find Tom's body convulsing on the bed. "He's seizing!" Dr. Reeves shouted, already moving to stabilize Tom. "Get me 10 milligrams of diazepam, stat!" As the medical team worked frantically to control Tom's seizure, his parents watched from the corner of the room, faces etched with fear and hope. "What's happening to him?" Sarah Thompson cried, clinging to her husband. Is he waking up? Dr. Chen turned to them, trying to keep her voice calm. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Tom's brain is showing unprecedented activity. It could be a positive sign, but we need to stabilize him first. Jack Thompson's face hardened. You said that before, Doctor. How do we know this isn't just making things worse? Before Dr. Chen could answer, Tom's body suddenly went still. The room held its collective breath as Dr. Reeves checked his vitals. He's stabilized, Dr. Reeves announced, the relief palpable in his voice. But his brain activity, it's still off the charts. Dr. Chen moved to Tom's bedside, studying his face intently. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw his eyes moving rapidly beneath his closed lids, as if he were in the deepest stage of REM sleep. Tom, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Tom, if you can hear me, we're trying to help you. We're going to bring you back. Deep within the dreamscape, Tom was fighting the battle of his life. The world around him was a maelstrom of color and sound, reality and fantasy blending and separating in dizzying patterns. Focus, Tom. Zephyr's voice cut through the chaos. Remember who you are. Remember why you're fighting. Tom gritted his teeth, pushing against the swirling vortex that threatened to sweep him away. In his mind, he clung to the memories of his family, his life, his identity. I am Tom Thompson, he growled, each word a struggle against the roaring wind of the dreamscape. I'm a grad student. I have a family who loves me, and I'm going to wake up. As he spoke, the chaos around him began to coalesce. Shapes formed in the mist, familiar faces, places from his past. He saw his childhood home, his university campus, the hospital room where his body lay. That's it, Tom, Zephyr encouraged. You're breaking through, but be careful. The barrier between dreams and reality is fragile. Push too hard, and you might lose yourself entirely. Tom nodded, sweat beading on his brow from the effort of maintaining his focus. He reached out towards the image of the hospital room, his fingers brushing against what felt like an invisible barrier. Suddenly, he could hear voices, distant and distorted, but unmistakably real. Unprecedented neural activity. Could be waking up. Tom, if you can hear me. I can hear you, Tom shouted, pounding against the barrier. I'm here. Help me. Back in the hospital room, the machines monitoring Tom's brain activity went haywire. Lights flashed, alarms blared, and the EEG readouts spiked in patterns none of the researchers had ever seen before. What's happening? Sarah Thompson asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Chen stared at the readings in disbelief. It's almost as if he's trying to communicate. Dr. Patel rushed to Tom's side, shining a light into his eyes. Pupillary response is active. Tom, can you hear us? For a heart-stopping moment, Tom's eyelids fluttered. A collective gasp went through the room. Come on, son, Jack Thompson urged, moving to stand beside his wife. You can do it, come back to us. Tom's fingers twitched, then his hand moved, reaching out as if grasping for something unseen. Dr. Chen made a split-second decision. The compound, she said, turning to Dr. Reeves. We need to administer it now. It might help him bridge the gap. Dr. Reeves hesitated. Eliza, we haven't completed all the trials. The risks are worth taking, Dr. Chen finished firmly. Look at him, James. He's fighting to come back. We need to give him every chance. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Reeves nodded. He quickly prepared the injection, swabbing Tom's arm with alcohol. Here goes nothing, he muttered, pressing the needle to Tom's skin. As the compound entered Tom's bloodstream, the room held its breath. For several agonizing seconds, nothing seemed to change. Then, Tom's eyes snapped open. In the dreamscape, Tom felt a surge of energy course through him. The barrier that had seemed so impenetrable moments ago now felt thin, fragile. This is your chance, Tom, Zephyr said urgently. But remember, waking up isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The real challenge will be holding on to yourself, separating dream from reality. Tom nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. I'm ready, and Zephyr, thank you for everything. With a final, mighty effort, Tom pushed against the barrier. He felt it give way, felt himself falling, flying, rushing towards a light that grew brighter and brighter until his eyes snapped open. The world came rushing back in a cacophony of sound and sensation. The sterile smell of the hospital room, the beeping of machines, the feeling of sheets against his skin. It was all overwhelming after so long in the dreamscape. Tom? Oh my God, Tom. His mother's face swam into view, tears streaming down her cheeks. His father was there too, and the doctors, all staring at him with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Tom tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his vocal cords unused for months. He managed a weak croak that sent his mother into fresh sobs of joy. Water, Dr. Chen said quickly. Get him some water. As Dr. Patel held a straw to his lips, Tom sipped gratefully. The cool liquid was a shock to his system, but a welcome one. Tom, Dr. Chen said gently, once he had drunk his fill, do you know where you are? Do you remember what happened? Tom nodded slowly, his mind racing to process everything. Hospital, he managed to rasp. Sleep, study. A look of relief passed between the doctors. That's right, Dr. Chen confirmed. You've been in a coma for several months. We weren't sure you'd wake up. Tom's eyes widened at this. Months? It had felt like an eternity in the dreamscape, but also like no time at all. He tried to sit up, but his muscles, weakened from disuse, refused to cooperate. Easy, easy, his father said, gently easing him back onto the pillows. You've been through a lot, son. Take it slow. As the initial shock of waking began to wear off, Tom became aware of a strange sensation. The world around him seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if it wasn't quite real. And overlaid on everything, he could still see faint traces of the dreamscape, swirling colors and impossible geometries that no one else seemed to notice. Tom, his mother said, noticing his distracted gaze. Are you all right? Tom blinked hard, trying to focus solely on the real world. Yeah, he said, his voice a little stronger now. Just, adjusting. Dr. Chen exchanged a concerned look with her colleagues. Tom, I know this must be overwhelming, but I need you to tell us, do you remember anything from while you were unconscious? Any dreams or experiences? Tom hesitated. How could he possibly explain the dreamscape? The battles he'd fought, the horrors he'd faced, the wonders he'd seen? How could he tell them about Zephyr, or the shadow creatures, or the way he'd learned to shape reality with his mind? It's complicated, he said finally. I'm not sure what was real and what wasn't. Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. That's to be expected. The mind can create very vivid experiences during prolonged unconsciousness. We'll work through it together, okay? As she spoke, Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, Dr. Chen's face seemed to flicker, revealing the ever-changing visage of Zephyr underneath. Tom closed his eyes tightly, his heart racing. When he opened them again, Dr. Chen was back to normal, looking at him with concern. Tom, are you sure you're all right? He forced a smile, trying to hide his growing panic. Yeah, just tired, I guess. As his parents and the doctors continued to fuss over him, discussing recovery plans and next steps, Tom's mind was reeling. He was awake. He was back in the real world. So why did everything still feel like a dream? And more importantly, how much of himself had he left behind in the dreamscape? As he looked around the room at the faces of his loved ones and the doctors who had saved him, one chilling question echoed in his mind. Was he really awake? Or was this just another layer of the dream? The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room seemed to pulse and flicker, casting strange shadows that danced at the edge of Tom's vision. He blinked hard, trying to focus on the faces around him. His parents, the doctors, the nurses. They all wore expressions of joy and relief, but to Tom their features seemed to shift and blur, as if he were viewing them through a warped lens. "Tom, honey, how are you feeling?" his mother asked, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out to touch his face, and Tom had to resist the urge to flinch away. Her hand felt both real and unreal, warm yet somehow insubstantial. I'm okay, Mom," he managed to say, his voice raspy from disuse. "Just disoriented." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. "That's to be expected, Tom. You've been unconscious for a long time. Your mind and body need time to readjust." Tom nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the window. Outside, he could see the city skyline, but it seemed wrong somehow. The buildings appeared to sway and ripple, like reflections in a pond. How long was I out?" he asked, tearing his eyes away from the unsettling view. A heavy silence fell over the room. Tom's father cleared his throat. 3 months, son. You've been in a coma for 3 months." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. 3 months? It had felt like an eternity in the dreamscape, yet also like no time at all. He closed his eyes, memories of his dream experiences flooding back, the shifting landscapes, the battles with shadow creatures, Zephyr's guidance. "Tom?" Dr. Chen's voice cut through his thoughts. "I know this is a lot to process, but I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" Tom opened his eyes, nodding hesitantly. Yeah, go ahead." Dr. Chen pulled up a chair, sitting close to the bed. "Can you tell me the last thing you remember before waking up here?" Tom's brow furrowed as he tried to separate reality from dream. I remember signing up for the sleep study, coming to the lab. You gave me an injection, and then..." He trailed off, unsure how to describe the vivid world he'd been trapped in. "And then?" Dr. Chen prompted gently. Tom shook his head. "It's all jumbled. I remember dreams, intense dreams, but I can't tell what was real and what wasn't." Dr. Chen made a note on her clipboard. "That's normal, Tom. The mind can create very vivid experiences during prolonged unconsciousness. Can you describe any of these dreams?" Tom hesitated. How could he explain the dreamscape? The way he'd learned to shape reality with his mind, the battles he'd fought, the wonders and horrors he'd witnessed? They'd think he was crazy. "There was a guide," he said finally. "Someone who helped me. And there were challenges, tests. It felt like I was fighting to wake up." Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "That's excellent, Tom. Your subconscious was likely working through the trauma of your experience. These tests might represent your mind's struggle to regain consciousness." As she spoke, Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, Dr. Chen's face seemed to flicker, revealing the ever-changing visage of Zephyr underneath. He blinked hard, and the illusion vanished. "Tom?" His mother's worried voice broke through his panic. "You've gone pale. Are you in pain?" Tom forced a smile. "No, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." Dr. Reeves stepped forward. "That's understandable. You've been through a tremendous ordeal. I think it's best if we let Tom rest now. We can continue our evaluation tomorrow." As the doctors prepared to leave, Tom's father spoke up. "Doctor, when can we take him home?" Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Dr. Reeves before answering. "Tom's condition is unique. We need to run more tests, monitor his progress. I'm afraid he'll need to stay here for at least a few more weeks." Tom felt a surge of panic at the thought of staying in the hospital. Everything here felt wrong, dreamlike. He needed to get out, to see the real world. "No," he said, his voice stronger than before. "I want to go home. Please." His mother squeezed his hand. "Honey, the doctors know what's best. We want to make sure you're really okay before..." "I'm fine," Tom insisted, trying to sit up. The room spun alarmingly and he fell back against the pillows. I I need to get out of here. Dr. Chen stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. Tom, I understand your frustration, but your body has been inactive for months. You need physical therapy, nutritional support, and continued monitoring. We can't risk your health by releasing you too soon. Tom wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was already pulling at him. His eyelids felt heavy, and the room seemed to blur around the edges. Rest now, Dr. Chen said softly. We'll talk more tomorrow. As Tom drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The line between dream and reality felt thinner than ever, and he wasn't sure which side he was truly on. In his dreams, he found himself back in the dreamscape. The familiar, ever-changing landscape stretched out before him, but now it was interspersed with elements from the hospital, medical equipment sprouting from the ground like strange flowers, corridors that led nowhere. Welcome back, Tom. Zephyr's voice echoed around him. I was wondering when you'd return. Tom spun around, searching for the source of the voice. Zephyr, what's going on? I thought I woke up. I thought it was over. Zephyr materialized before him, its form shifting and swirling. Oh, Tom, it's never truly over. The dreamscape is a part of you now, just as you are a part of it. No, Tom said, shaking his head vehemently. No, I'm awake now. This is just a normal dream. Zephyr's laughter echoed across the landscape. Is it? Are you sure? The line between dream and reality isn't as clear as you might think, Tom. Especially for someone who's spent as much time here as you have. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying, that I'm still trapped here? Not trapped, Zephyr corrected. Enlightened. You've seen beyond the veil, Tom. You've experienced a level of consciousness that few humans ever achieve. Did you really think you could go back to your old life as if nothing had changed? Before Tom could respond, the dream began to fade. He felt himself being pulled back to consciousness, Zephyr's words echoing in his mind. He awoke with a start, his heart racing. The hospital room came into focus around him, but it still felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper, the colors too vivid, and there, at the edge of his vision, he could swear he saw traces of the dreamscape, swirling patterns and impossible geometries that vanished when he tried to look directly at them. A nurse entered the room, smiling brightly. Good morning, Tom. How are you feeling today? Tom opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. For a moment, just a moment, the nurse's face had flickered, revealing a grotesque, shadowy visage underneath. Tom? The nurse prompted, her smile faltering slightly. Are you all right? Tom swallowed hard, forcing himself to nod. Yeah, I'm fine, just still waking up, I guess. As the nurse began checking his vitals, Tom's mind raced. What was happening to him? Was he losing his grip on reality? Or had his time in the dreamscape altered his perception somehow, allowing him to see things others couldn't? He thought back to Zephyr's words. The line between dream and reality isn't as clear as you might think. What if he wasn't fully awake after all? What if this was just another layer of the dream, more realistic, but no less false? The door opened, and his parents entered, followed by Dr. Chen. They all wore expressions of concern, but to Tom, their faces seemed to flicker and shift, revealing glimpses of other entities underneath. Some benign, others terrifying. Good morning, Tom, Dr. Chen said, her voice echoing strangely in Tom's ears. How are you feeling today? Any clearer memories of your experience? Tom looked from face to face, trying to discern what was real and what wasn't. The room seemed to pulse around him, reality and dream blending in a dizzying swirl. In that moment, Tom made a decision. He couldn't trust what he was seeing or hearing. He couldn't be sure if he was truly awake or still trapped in some level of the dreamscape. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to find a way out. He had to discover the truth no matter the cost. With a surge of will he didn't know he possessed, Tom pushed himself up in the bed. I need to leave, he said, his voice stronger than it had been since he'd awakened. Now." The others exchanged worried glances. "Tom," his father began, "you're not well enough to—" "No," Tom interrupted. "You don't understand. None of you do. I can't stay here. I need to see the real world. I need to know what's real." As he spoke, the room seemed to waver around him, reality bending and twisting like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Tom closed his eyes tightly, fighting against the vertigo. When he opened them again, he found everyone staring at him with a mixture of concern and fear. He realized he had to be careful. If they thought he was losing his mind, they'd never let him leave. Taking a deep breath, Tom forced a smile. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I didn't mean to worry you. I feel cooped up. Maybe we could go for a short walk? Just down the hall?" Dr. Chen hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A short walk might be good for you, Tom, but only if you feel up to it." As they helped him out of bed, Tom's mind was racing. This was his chance. He had to find a way out, to test the boundaries of this reality. Only then could he be sure if he was truly awake or still lost in the labyrinth of his own mind. The dreamscape had taught him that reality was malleable, shaped by will and belief. Now it was time to put that knowledge to the test in the waking world. As he took his first shaky steps, supported by his parents and the doctor, Tom steeled himself for what was to come. Whatever happened next, he was determined to uncover the truth. Even if that truth shattered everything he thought he knew about reality itself. The world outside Tom's hospital room was a cacophony of sensory overload. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed with an intensity that made his teeth ache. Every footstep, every beep of a machine, every murmured conversation seemed to echo and amplify in his mind. Tom gripped the handrail of his walker tightly, his knuckles white with the effort of staying upright. "Are you sure you're up for this, honey?" his mother asked, hovering anxiously at his side. Her face flickered momentarily, revealing a swirl of colors and shapes before settling back into her familiar features. Tom swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just taking it slow." Dr. Chen walked a few steps ahead, occasionally glancing back with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Remember, Tom, if you feel dizzy or overwhelmed at any point, we can go back to your room." Tom nodded, but he had no intention of returning to that sterile cage. He needed to push forward, to test the boundaries of this reality. With each step, he focused intently on his surroundings, searching for any sign that this was all just another layer of the dream. As they rounded a corner, Tom's breath caught in his throat. The hospital corridor stretched out before him, but it seemed to twist and bend in impossible ways. The walls pulsed with faint, swirling patterns that reminded him of the dreamscape. "Tom," his father's voice sounded distant. "You've gone pale. Do you need to sit down?" Tom shook his head, blinking hard. When he opened his eyes, the corridor had returned to normal. Or had it? He couldn't be sure anymore. "I'm okay," he muttered. "Let's keep going." They made their way to a small courtyard in the center of the hospital. The open air should have been a relief, but Tom found it even more disorienting. The sky above seemed too vibrant, the clouds moving too quickly. And there, at the edge of his vision, he could swear he saw fragments of the dreamscape bleeding through, crystal spires and impossible geometries that vanished when he tried to focus on them. "Why don't we sit for a moment?" Dr. Chen suggested, gesturing to a nearby bench. Tom lowered himself onto the bench, grateful for the rest. His muscles, weakened from months of disuse, trembled with exertion. As he caught his breath, he noticed a young girl playing near a small fountain. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for a split second, her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Tom jerked back, nearly falling off the bench. "Did you see that?" he gasped, pointing at the girl. His parents and Dr. Chen exchanged worried glances. "See what, son?" his father asked gently. Tom looked back at the girl, but she was just a normal child now, happily splashing in the fountain. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. Nothing. I guess I'm just tired. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice low and soothing. Tom, it's normal to experience some disorientation after what you've been through. Your mind is still adjusting to being awake. Can you tell me what you thought you saw? Tom hesitated. How could he explain without sounding completely insane? It's hard to describe. Sometimes things don't look quite right. Like they're shifting, changing. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's not uncommon after prolonged unconsciousness. Your visual processing centers are readjusting. It should pass with time. But Tom wasn't so sure. This felt different, more real than any hallucination. It was as if he was seeing beyond the veil of reality, catching glimpses of something else. As they made their way back to his room, Tom's mind raced. He needed to find a way to prove to himself that this was real, that he was truly awake. But how? Back in his room, exhausted from the short excursion, Tom lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His parents had gone to get coffee, leaving him alone with his tumultuous thoughts. A soft knock at the door roused him from his contemplation. A nurse he didn't recognize entered, carrying a tray of medication. "Time for your evening meds, Mr. Thompson," she said cheerfully. Tom eyed the pills warily. In the dreamscape, he had learned to be cautious of anything that might alter his perception. "What are they for?" he asked. The nurse's smile never wavered. "Just some vitamins and mild sedatives to help you sleep, dear. Doctor's orders." As she approached the bed, Tom noticed something odd about her movements. They were too smooth, almost gliding. And her eyes, they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the room. Heart pounding, Tom made a split-second decision. As the nurse held out the paper cup of pills, he knocked it from her hand, sending the medication scattering across the floor. "You're not real," he shouted, scrambling back in the bed. "None of this is real." The nurse's face contorted, her features melting and reforming into something inhuman. "Oh, Tom," she said, her voice now a multi-toned chorus. "You're more perceptive than we gave you credit for." Before Tom could react, the room began to dissolve around him. The walls melted away, revealing the swirling chaos of the dreamscape beyond. Tom felt a moment of vertigo as reality shifted, and then he jerked awake with a gasp, finding himself back in the hospital bed. His parents and Dr. Chen stood around him, their faces etched with concern. "Tom? Honey, are you all right?" his mother asked, reaching for his hand. Tom pulled away, his eyes wild. "Don't touch me. How do I know you're real? How do I know any of this is real?" "Doctor." Chen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Tom, you were having a nightmare. You're safe. You're awake now." But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this too was just another layer of the dream. He closed his eyes tightly, concentrating with all his might. If this was the dreamscape, he should be able to change it, to shape reality with his will. "Tom?" His father's worried voice broke through his concentration. "Son, please talk to us." Tom opened his eyes, dismayed to find the hospital room unchanged. Either his powers from the dreamscape didn't work here, or this was truly reality. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Dr. Chen sat on the edge of the bed, her expression grave. "Tom, I think we need to talk about what you're experiencing. These episodes of disorientation, the nightmares, they're more severe than we anticipated." Tom laughed bitterly. "Episodes of disorientation? Doc, you have no idea what I'm going through. I can't tell what's real anymore. I see things, impossible things. And I don't know if I'm going crazy or if something happened to me in there." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke. "Tom, I want to be honest with you. The drug we used in the sleep study, it had some unexpected effects on your brain chemistry. We're still not sure of the full extent of those changes." Tom's parents gasped. His father's face reddened with anger. "You mean you did this to him?" You broke my son's mind with your experiment? Dr. Chen held up a placating hand. Mr. Thompson, please. We're doing everything we can to understand what's happening and how to help Tom. But we need his cooperation. She turned back to Tom, her eyes intense. Tom, I want to bring in a specialist, someone who deals with altered states of consciousness. Would you be willing to talk to them? Tom hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse, to insist that he was fine, but a larger part knew he needed help. He couldn't go on like this, constantly questioning his own sanity and the nature of reality itself. Okay, he said finally. I'll talk to them, but I need you to promise me something. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. Of course, what is it? Tom took a deep breath. I need you to be completely honest with me. About the experiment, about what's happening to me. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I need to know everything if I'm going to get through this. Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Tom's parents before nodding solemnly. You're right, Tom. You deserve the full truth. And I promise, from this moment on, complete transparency. As she spoke, Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, almost too quick to perceive, Dr. Chen's face seemed to flicker. In that instant, he saw not the concerned doctor, but the ever-shifting visage of Zephyr. Tom closed his eyes, fighting against the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm him. When he opened them again, Dr. Chen was back to normal, looking at him with worry. Are you all right, Tom? She asked. You went pale for a moment there. Tom forced a smile, his mind racing. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess. As the others began discussing plans for his treatment, Tom's thoughts were in turmoil. He had agreed to cooperate, to seek help. But deep down, a part of him wondered if any amount of therapy or medication could fix what had been broken inside him. The line between dream and reality had been irrevocably blurred. And as Tom looked around the room, at the faces of those who claimed to care for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that his journey through the labyrinth of his own mind was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on Dr. Amelia Winter's office wall seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Tom sat rigidly in the plush armchair, his fingers digging into the armrests as he struggled to maintain his composure. The renowned neuropsychiatrist sat across from him, her piercing blue eyes studying him intently over the rim of her glasses. Tell me again about these episodes, Tom, Dr. Winter said, her voice calm and measured. What exactly do you see? Tom swallowed hard, his gaze darting around the room. The bookshelves seemed to breathe, the spines of the books rippling like waves. He blinked hard and the illusion vanished. It's not always the same, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes things just look wrong. Colors are too vivid or shapes don't quite make sense. But other times, he trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. Other times what, Tom? Tom took a deep breath. Other times it's like reality. Cracks. I see things that can't be real. Impossible things. And people, their faces change. It's like I'm seeing through some kind of mask to what's underneath. As he spoke, Dr. Winter's face seemed to flicker, revealing for a split second a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. Tom jerked back in his seat, his heart racing. Tom? Dr. Winter's voice cut through his panic. Are you having an episode now? He nodded, unable to speak, his eyes wide with fear. Dr. Winters made a note on her pad. I want you to try something for me, Tom. Close your eyes and focus on your breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4. Out for 4. Can you do that? Tom nodded again, squeezing his eyes shut. He focused on his breath, trying to ignore the swirling patterns he could see even behind his closed eyelids. Good, Dr. Winters said softly. Now, I want you to ground yourself in this moment. Feel the chair beneath you, the air on your skin. Listen to the sound of my voice. This is real, Tom. You're safe here. Slowly, Tom felt his racing heart begin to calm. He opened his eyes cautiously, relieved to find the room back to normal. Dr. Winters gave him a reassuring smile. "Well done, Tom. Now, let's talk about these experiences. When did they start?" Tom ran a shaky hand through his hair. "Right after I woke up from the coma. At first I thought it was just disorientation, but it kept happening, and it's getting worse." Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "And in the coma itself? Do you remember dreaming?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Dreaming? Doc, you have no idea. It wasn't just dreams, it was another world. A place where reality bent to my will, where I could shape things with my mind. And there was someone there, a guide named Zephyr. It all felt so real." As he spoke, Tom noticed a change in Dr. Winters' demeanor. Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of, was that recognition? "This guide, Zephyr," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Can you describe them?" Tom frowned, puzzled by her sudden interest. "It's hard to explain. Zephyr wasn't really male or female. Their form kept changing like it was made of smoke or something. But they taught me how to navigate the dreamscape, how to control it." Dr. Winters was scribbling furiously on her notepad now. "Tom, what you're describing, it's remarkably similar to accounts of deep meditative states or certain psychedelic experiences. The malleable reality, the guide figure, these are archetypal elements of altered consciousness." Tom leaned forward, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "So you're saying you've heard of this before? That I'm not going crazy?" Dr. Winters hesitated. "I'm saying that your experience, while extreme, is not entirely without precedent. The human mind is capable of creating incredibly vivid and complex inner worlds, especially under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances." "Like the drug from the sleep study," Tom said, the pieces starting to fall into place. "Exactly," Dr. Winters confirmed. "From what Dr. Chen has told me, the compound used in the study was meant to induce a state of deep restorative sleep, but in your case, it seems to have opened a door to something more." Tom's mind was reeling. "So what does this mean? Can you fix me? Make these visions stop?" Dr. Winters set down her notepad, her expression grave. "Tom, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're experiencing is beyond the scope of conventional treatment. Your brain chemistry has been fundamentally altered. We can try medication to manage the symptoms, therapy to help you cope, but you can't make it go away," Tom finished, his heart sinking. "Not entirely, no," Dr. Winters admitted. "However, there might be another approach we could consider." Tom looked up, hope warring with trepidation in his chest. "What kind of approach?" Dr. Winters leaned back in her chair, studying Tom intently. "Tell me, Tom, in the dreamscape you said you learned to control your environment to shape reality with your mind. Have you tried applying those techniques here in the waking world?" Tom's eyes widened. "You mean, you think I could control these visions? Make them stop?" "Not exactly," Dr. Winters clarified. "But you might be able to learn to navigate them, to distinguish between what's real and what's a product of your altered perception. It would require intense mental discipline, but given what you've already accomplished in the dreamscape, I believe you might have the capacity for it." As she spoke, the room around them began to shift and warp. The walls seemed to breathe, the floor rippling like water. Tom gripped the armrests of his chair, panic rising in his throat. "It's happening again," he gasped. "Everything's changing." Dr. Winters leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Remember what I taught you, Tom. Ground yourself in this moment. Focus on what you know is real." Tom closed his eyes, concentrating on the feeling of the chair beneath him, the sound of Dr. Winters' voice. When he opened them again, the room had stabilized, though faint traces of the distortion lingered at the edges of his vision. "I did it," he breathed, amazed. "I made it stop." Dr. Winters smiled encouragingly. Excellent work, Tom. This is just the beginning. With practice, you may be able to exert more control over these episodes. As their session came to an end, Tom felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since waking from his coma. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start, a way to navigate the strange new reality he found himself in. But as he stood to leave, a chill ran down his spine. For just a moment, Dr. Winters' face seemed to shift, revealing the ever-changing visage of Zephyr underneath. "Remember, Tom," she said, her voice echoing strangely, "the line between dreams and reality is thinner than you think. Be careful which side you choose to stand on." Tom blinked, and Dr. Winters was back to normal, smiling warmly as she showed him to the door. He shook his head, trying to clear the lingering unease. As he made his way out of the office, the world around him seemed to pulse and shift. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering in mesmerizing patterns. Tom took a deep breath, focusing on the techniques Dr. Winters had taught him. "This is real," he muttered to himself. "I'm awake. I'm in control." Slowly, reality seemed to stabilize around him, but even as the hallway returned to normal, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope between two worlds, one foot in reality, one in the dreamscape, forever balanced on the knife edge between waking and dreaming. He stepped out into the bright sunlight, squinting against the glare. The city stretched out before him, a maze of buildings and streets that seemed both familiar and alien. As he watched, the skyline rippled and shifted, crystal spires from the dreamscape blending seamlessly with modern skyscrapers. Tom closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, the city was back to normal. Or was it? He couldn't be sure anymore. As he began the walk home, Tom steeled himself for what lay ahead. He had a long journey before him, learning to navigate this new, fluid reality, to distinguish between what was real and what was a product of his altered mind. But for the first time since waking, he felt a spark of determination. He would master this, just as he had mastered the dreamscape. He would find a way to live in this world of shifting perceptions and blurred realities. And maybe, just maybe, he would discover the truth about what had really happened to him in that sleep study. Because deep down, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his experience than anyone was telling him, that the dreamscape and Zephyr were more real than anyone wanted to admit. As he walked, the world flickered and shifted around him, reality and dream blending in a dizzying dance. But Tom kept moving forward, one step at a time, into the uncertain future that awaited him. The wind whipped around Tom as he stood at the edge of the cliff, his toes curling over the precipice. Far below, angry waves crashed against jagged rocks, their roar a constant thunderous backdrop to the chaos in his mind. The sky above was a maelstrom of impossible colors, swirling and shifting in patterns that hurt to look at. "Is this real?" Tom whispered, his words immediately snatched away by the wind. "Or am I still dreaming?" He closed his eyes, focusing on the techniques Dr. Winters had taught him. Ground yourself in the moment. Feel what's real. But when he opened his eyes again, the surreal landscape remained unchanged. "Tom!" A voice called out from behind him. "Tom, please, step away from the edge." He turned to see his parents and Dr. Chen rushing towards him, their faces contorted with fear and worry. But as they drew closer, their features began to shift and blur, sometimes revealing glimpses of other entities underneath, some benign, others terrifying. "Stay back!" Tom shouted, taking a half-step closer to the edge. "I don't know if you're real. I don't know if any of this is real anymore." His mother reached out a trembling hand. "Sweetie, please, we're real. We're here to help you." But even as she spoke, her face flickered, momentarily revealing the ever-changing visage of Zephyr. Tom stumbled back, his heel sending a few loose pebbles tumbling into the abyss below. "No," he muttered, shaking his head violently. "This is just another trick, another layer of the dream." Dr. Chen took a cautious step forward. "Tom, listen to me. I know you're confused, but this is reality. What you're seeing, these distortions, they're a result of the drug's lingering effects on your brain chemistry. But we can help you, we can make it stop. Tom laughed bitterly. Make it stop. Do you have any idea what I've been through, what I've seen? He gestured wildly at the surreal landscape around them. This is nothing compared to the dreamscape. At least there, I had control. I could shape reality. Here, I'm powerless, lost. As he spoke, the world around them began to shift and warp. The cliff edge crumbled away, reforming into a spiraling staircase that led down into swirling mists. The sky above fractured like breaking glass, revealing glimpses of other realities beyond. Tom's father stumbled, disoriented by the changing environment. What's happening? How is this possible? It's Tom, Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with awe and fear. Somehow, he's affecting reality itself. The barrier between his mind and the physical world, it's breaking down. Tom turned back to the edge, staring down into the swirling abyss below. Maybe if I jump, I'll wake up. Maybe this is the key to escaping this nightmare once and for all. No! His mother cried out, lunging forward. But an invisible force held her back, as if reality itself was bending to Tom's will. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos. Is this really what you want, Tom? Tom spun around to see Zephyr standing there, its form shifting and swirling like smoke in the wind. The others seemed frozen in place, as if time had stopped for everyone but Tom and his dream guide. Zephyr, Tom whispered, his voice a mixture of relief and suspicion. Is it really you? Or are you just another hallucination? Zephyr smiled, the expression somehow visible despite its ever-changing face. Does it matter? Real or not, I'm here. The question is, what are you going to do now? Tom glanced back at the edge of the cliff, then to his frozen family and Dr. Chen. I don't know. I can't live like this anymore. Constantly questioning what's real, never knowing if I'm awake or dreaming. It's tearing me apart. Zephyr nodded solemnly. The path you've walked is not an easy one, Tom. Few humans have ever glimpsed the true nature of reality as you have. But with great knowledge comes great responsibility. Responsibility? Tom scoffed. I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to make some extra money, not have my entire reality shattered. And yet here you are, Zephyr said, gesturing to the fractured landscape around them, straddling the line between worlds, with the power to shape reality itself. The question is, what will you do with that power? Tom ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear warring within him. I don't want this power. I just want things to go back to normal, to know what's real and what isn't. Zephyr's form rippled, growing more solid for a moment. Normal is a matter of perspective, Tom. What you call reality is just one layer of a much greater whole. You've seen beyond the veil. Can you really go back to ignorance? As Zephyr spoke, memories of the dreamscape flooded Tom's mind. The wonders he'd seen, the impossible beauty and terror he'd experienced. Could he really turn his back on all of that? But what about my family? Tom asked, his voice breaking. My life here? Am I supposed to just abandon everything I've ever known? Zephyr shook its head. It's not about abandoning one world for another, Tom. It's about finding balance, learning to navigate both realms, to be a bridge between worlds. Tom closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the choice before him. On one side, the familiar comfort of his old life, even if it meant constantly doubting his own perceptions. On the other, a journey into the unknown, embracing the power and responsibility that came with his newfound awareness. When he opened his eyes, Tom saw that the landscape had changed once again. The cliff edge had transformed into a literal crossroads. One path led back to the frozen figures of his family and Dr. Chen, representing his life in the real world. The other path spiraled off into swirling mists, promising adventures in realms beyond imagination. The choice is yours, Tom, Zephyr said softly. But know this, whatever you decide, There's no going back to who you were before. You've been changed irrevocably. The question is, will you let that change destroy you, or will you embrace it and grow? Tom took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He looked at his family, feeling a pang of love and regret. Then he turned to the misty path, feeling the pull of the unknown. In that moment of clarity, Tom realized that he didn't have to choose one path over the other. He could be a bridge, as Zephyr had said, a traveler between worlds, learning to balance both aspects of his new existence. I choose both, Tom said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I won't abandon my family or my life here, but I won't deny this new part of myself either. I'll find a way to live in both worlds. As he spoke, the landscape began to shift once again. The two paths merged, forming a single road that seemed to exist in multiple realities at once. Tom could see glimpses of his hospital room, the dreamscape, and countless other realms all overlapping and intertwining. Zephyr smiled, its form beginning to fade. A wise choice, Tom. The road ahead won't be easy, but it will be extraordinary. Remember, reality is what you make of it. Shape it wisely. With that, Zephyr vanished, and time seemed to restart. Tom's family and Dr. Chen unfroze, looking around in confusion at the changed environment. Tom, his mother called out, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and hope. What's happening? Are you okay? Tom turned to them, a small smile on his face. For the first time since waking from his coma, he felt truly present, truly himself. I'm okay, Mom. Better than okay, actually. I think I finally understand. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. Understand what, Tom? What's going on? Tom took a deep breath, looking out at the merged realities stretching before him. It's hard to explain, Doc, but I think I found a way to live with all of this, to balance between worlds. His father frowned, clearly struggling to comprehend. Worlds? Tom, what are you talking about? I know it doesn't make sense right now, Tom said, walking towards them. But I promise I'm not crazy and I'm not giving up. I'm just expanding. And I'm going to need your help to navigate this new reality. As he reached his family, the surreal landscape began to fade, slowly resolving back into the familiar surroundings of the cliff where they had found him. But Tom could still see traces of the other realities, shimmering at the edges of his vision. He knew the road ahead would be challenging. Learning to control his newfound abilities, to distinguish between different layers of reality, to live a life straddling multiple worlds, it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Tom felt hope. He wasn't trapped in a dream or lost in reality. He was both and neither, and something entirely new. An explorer of consciousness, a shaper of realities, a bridge between worlds. As Tom embraced his parents, feeling the warmth of their love grounding him in this moment, he silently thanked Zephyr and the dreamscape for showing him the true nature of reality. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Tom was ready to face it head-on. After all, reality was what he made of it, and he intended to make it extraordinary.